Mr. Chair, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, and ladies and gentlemen, I'm honored to present my third report to the Human Rights Council, which provides an overview of the current human rights situation in the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, DPRK, focusing on the critical interlinkage between economic, social, and cultural rights, peace and security in the Korean Peninsula, and relevant Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs. The human rights situation in the DPRK remains a serious concern. The country's prolonged isolation, lack of humanitarian assistance from the United Nations and other organizations, and further restrictions to access to information have aggravated people's human rights. Stricter laws introduced by the government have curtailed rights to freedom of movement, to work, and to freedom of expression and opinion. Harsher punishment, including the death penalty and public executions, are being imposed for violating them. Recent reports suggest that the DPRK has deployed its soldiers to the Russia-Ukraine conflict. While military conscription is not against international law, the poor human rights conditions of soldiers while in service in the DPRK, plus the government's widespread exploitation of its own people, raises several concerns. The DPRK's extreme militarization policies are sustained through extensive reliance on forced labor and quota systems. Also, all military personnel must be protected under international law if they are captured. Last November, the DPRK participated in its fourth cycle of Universal Periodic Review. The delegation agreed to consider 2/3 of the recommendations made by member states. Implementing some of these requires reprioritization of resources in order to increase social investment, realize all human rights, achieve SDGs, and promote a culture of peace. Excellencies, the SDGs adopted in 2015 reflect much of the core content of economic, social, and cultural rights. The DPRK has committed to implementing the SDGs through its national development goals and has signed a strategic framework for cooperation with the United Nations. Unfortunately, in the current pace, it is far from meeting its SDGs targets before the 2030 deadline. The DPRK alleges that sanctions hinder their progress in the national development goals. It must be reminded, however, that a sanctioned state is still the primary duty bearer in realizing the economic, social, and cultural rights of its people. It is upon DPRK to take steps towards denuclearization so that sanctions can be eased and more resources become available for human rights. SDG 16 shows disarmament leads to the promotion of peaceful and inclusive societies for sustainable development. The DPRK ratified key United Nations treaties on economic, social, and cultural rights. While these rights have a progressive nature, they impose immediate obligations on states who must guarantee minimum essential levels for all. Most importantly, any form of regression or discrimination is prohibited. The government's overall approach does not address the inaccessibility of marginalized groups to food, health, education, water, and sanitation. For example, despite the DPRK's focus on increasing overall domestic food production, over 45% of the population, 11.8 million people, are undernourished. The government has shifted from accommodating informal markets to establishing a state monopoly selling of staple food. Under the strict border shutdowns since early 2020, many cannot afford food. Yet, the government's public distribution system is discriminatory and irregular. Only those loyal to the leadership receive regular public distribution. Reports indicate instances of starvation during the border shutdown and possibly more to come during the harvest gap in spring. The most affected groups are the elder, people with medical conditions, and those without savings in rural areas. Similar challenges are present regarding the right to health. The law of the DPRK guarantees a universal free medical care system. The country has a high ratio of doctors to population and a strong network of hospitals and clinics. Nevertheless, the medical facilities lack medicine, medical equipment, water and sanitation, electricity, and trained medical personnel. Patients have to bear the cost by bringing in necessary items or buying medicines in markets. Therefore, health services are not affordable for the vast majority. The DPRK has made efforts to ensure the right to education, guaranteeing compulsory 12-year universal and free education by law. As of 2017, completion rates were nearly universal, and literacy rates remained high for both men and women. However, significant challenges persist in guaranteeing equitable access to this right. Reports indicate that the students are frequently required to contribute to the school's operation and teachers' salaries, making education unaffordable for children from low-income families. Children with disabilities continue to face multiple barriers to accessing education, and much fewer women than men get enrolled in higher education. Likewise, the DPRK has committed to ensuring the right to water and sanitation. The government has admitted a slow progress despite active measures in achieving the SDGs 6 on water, sanitation, and hygiene. Access to water is not consistent due to irregular electricity supply in the country. Over half of households lack adequate sanitation, causing diarrhea and death among children and worsening malnutrition. Excellencies, the roadmap to achieve the SDGs in the DPRK depends on the state's compliance to economic, social, and cultural rights. This cannot be done if the government continues to ignore discrimination based on Salmón, the discriminatory caste system that privileges loyalty to the leadership, gender, and other prohibited grounds. To address such inequalities and discrimination, the first step is to collect and openly report disaggregated data on access to basic services of marginalized populations. Resources must be prioritized for human rights. People must be placed at the center of any future engagement and negotiations in making peace or denuclearization deals. My report provides concrete recommendations for all parties to act in coordination to fulfill economic, social, and cultural rights and related SDGs. I welcome, as always, constructive dialogue, contributions, and partnerships to achieve this common goal. Thank you for your attention.